Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So happy to have all of you here, students from Indonesia, from Brazil, and from the US. Perhaps, if you don't mind, you could drop on the chat your name and which city you're from so that we get to know everyone a bit better. Thank you so much. So my name is Intan. I'm with the Pulitzer Center and I'm based here in Jakarta. So yeah, I hope you're as excited as I am to join today's dialogue on climate and labor. And today we'll hear from two fantastic speakers, and we'll get to have a Q&A with them, and we'll dive into the student dialogue session. But before going further, I would like to say thank you very much to our partners who've made this dialogue possible. We have Universitas Atmajaya from Yogyakarta, Universitas Airlangga in Surabaya. We have Emancipa with campuses in Sao Paulo, Brazil Northeast, and Amazonia. And also, of course, the Washington University in St. Louis. Thank you so much for being here and welcome. So we're all familiar with Zoom meetings, of course, but if you do need Portuguese-English translation, just click on the button below. And yeah, we'll provide translation there. So just a little bit of introduction on what brought us here tonight. So a little bit about the Pulitzer Center. So the Pulitzer Center, we are a journalism organization. We are headquartered in Washington, D.C., but with staff all over the world. And as a journalism organization, we are supporting journalistic reporting on underreported issues. And our hope is that through these reporting and its investigative or in-depth nature, these will hopefully inspire action on issues that are complex, issues that are global, but being faced by communities around the world. So talking about climate and labor, we are by now familiar with the climate crisis, but our media assessment shows that there is not so much attention given to the intersectional issue of climate and labor or workers' rights and the job sector. So we are so amazed with the work of a lot of Pulitzer Center grantees like Erin, of course, that have explored what are the consequences faced by the workers around the world. We're talking about migrants, construction workers, delivery workers, fishermen, coastal communities, and these are people who are most vulnerable to climate change, extreme heat, etc. So we hope that through today's discussion, we'd be able to connect you, the students, with these stories, and hopefully to inspire action in the future. So we've prepared a little question on Slido just to get to know your views a little bit better. So if Granty could drop on the chat the link, yes. So I hope you don't mind to just clicking in and typing your answer. If you're anxious about climate change, that's the first question. Yeah. I'll try to chime in with my level of anxiety around climate change as well. So, okay, I think we're starting to see results here. So we have 80% on level 5. So are you anxious about climate change? And 83% answers yes. And what is the next one, the answer? From a scale of 1 to 5, how confident are you that young people can drive change in climate action? Okay, anxious but confident that we can all drive positive change together. So that's great. Mm-hmm. Is there the next question, Granty? Or is that it? Okay. Oh, equally. All right. So, yeah. So thank you for sharing your views. We've learned that we're anxious, but yeah, we are quite optimistic that we can collectively take action together around climate change. So I think now we could transition to the um, next session, which is the the talks by the speakers. So I think we can start with Dr. Leonidas. We are very happy to have you here with us. So a little bit of introduction. Dr. Leonidas is the founder of the Heat Health Organization in Europe, dedicated to protecting human health in the face of climate change. He's working as a senior researcher at the Joseph Stefan Institute in Slovenia, and he holds two PhDs in environmental and occupational physiology. He's been conducting research shaping key heat health regulations, collaborating with the WHO and ILO, among other organizations. So, Dr. Leonidas, please take the floor. The time is yours.
Thank you for the introduction. Can you please confirm that you can see my screen? Sure. Okay, let me. Okay. Do you see my screen? It's in full screen, or yeah,
yes.
Everything?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I'll take a laser pointer here. So, okay. Occupational stress has affected workers since ancient times. Historical reports dating back more than 2,000 years indicate that workers in hot quarries died due to sun exposure. And one might assume that the situation will have actually improved over 2 millennia. However, recent epidemiological studies report that there is one death due to occupational stress every 14 to 24 minutes. And unfortunately, this number is projected to increase with the ongoing climate change. Let's see what happens when someone works in the heat now. Here we have an agricultural worker who works under the sun, as you can see. Firstly, we exchange heat via radiation. We absorb radiant heat either directly from the sun or indirectly from other sources of radiation. Conversely, if our body temperature is higher than that of our surroundings, we also emit radiant heat back into the environment, as you can see here. Secondly, heat transfer occurs through conduction. When we touch an object that is warmer than our body, thermal energy is transferred to us from the object. An example of this is the digging tool depicted in this illustration here. Heat is also transferred through convection. As depicted in this illustration, this refers to the physiological mechanism of vasomotion, as well as the influence of ambient wind speed. Convection can either increase or decrease body temperature depending on the surrounding thermal environment. Last but not least is evaporation. This is primarily associated with sweating, our body's main physiological response to heat. Sweat is secreted onto the surface of our skin where it evaporates, thereby helping to cool our bodies down. Although these pathways and physiological mechanisms help workers reduce physiological heat strain, millions of occupational heat strain cases still occur every single day. Before examining the impact on workers, let's consider what animal studies reveal. Rats cease exercising when their brain temperature exceeds 40 degrees Celsius, and goats stop walking when their brain temperature goes beyond 42 degrees Celsius. How does this translate to humans now, and more specifically to workers? Although our thermoregulatory mechanisms are not identical to those of animals, some are indeed common. As illustrated in this slide, both sheep and humans instinctively avoid sun exposure and behaviorally prefer to work in cooler environments. However, when moving to a cooler environment is not sufficient to maintain a worker's temperature within safe limits, more drastic measures are taken. Specifically, as we can see in this slide, workers start taking unplanned breaks or reduce the intensity of their work. It is important to note that not all workers understand the impact of heat exposure on their labor productivity. For instance, here we have asked a typical Mediterranean agriculture worker if he believes that heat exposure affect his labor capacity. Let's hear his response.
Τόσο πολλά όταν έχεις τη σωστή σου ενδυμασία, τον καπέλο σου, μακρύ πουκάμισο, αλλά είναι λίγο ενοχλητικός τις μεσημερινές ώρες.
So he feels that if someone is well prepared, heat is not a big issue. Same worker, few hours later. He takes many unplanned breaks in the shade, as you can see in this picture. This is the exact same worker. The graph here also illustrates the relationship between ambient temperature and his labor loss. As you can see, when the ambient temperature increases to 31 degrees Celsius, he experiences approximately 15% reduction in his labor productivity. This data was from a single worker. Now let's examine our findings from a study with nearly 200 participants. The U-shaped curve depicted in this slide indicates that the 15 degrees WBGT wet bulb globe temperature. For those of you who are not familiar with this WBGT, this is a thermal stress indicator that considers not only air temperature, but also humidity, wind, and sunlight. So 15 degrees WBGT is the optimal condition for agriculture workers. Any environment warmer or colder than this exponentially increases labor loss. And of course, this has significant implications for countries around the globe. Areas shaded in red on this map are projected to experience a reduction in labor productivity from 2000 to 2040. For instance, you can see Indonesia here depicted in dark red is expected to see an approximately 2% decrease in labor productivity during the period from 2000 to 2040. Same for Brazil, but for these states, things are a bit better. In this slide, I'll shift focus from normal work shifts in the heat to heat extremes, specifically heat waves. For those of you unfamiliar with the term heat wave, a heat wave is defined as at least 3 consecutive days of abnormally high temperatures. So the question we aimed to address a few years back was how a heat wave affects labor productivity and physiological strain. To find answers, we conducted an experiment where participants were confined in a hotel for 10 days, during which they had to sleep, eat, and work under simulated environmental conditions. The first day was a familiarization day, followed by 3 days under neutral temperatures. As illustrated in this graph, at midnight on the 4th day, we increased the temperature to simulate the intensity of the Paris heat wave. For those of you who are not familiar with the Paris heat wave, it occurred back in 2003, and it was responsible for more than 15,000 deaths. Also, 10-day heat wave. Here we simulated only 3 days, same intensity though. This heat wave was followed by 3 more days of neutral temperatures. So 25 degrees, 35 degrees for the heat wave, 25 degrees Celsius again. During all 10 days, our participants had to perform a simulated assembly line task for 2 hours. This was conducted using a software which presents participants with images of electronic circuit boards traveling on an assembly line conveyor belt. Participants were required to perform quality control inspection of these electronic circuit boards in order to identify and discard faulty products or repair certain types of defective products. Here I have a video from our experiment. You can see the simulated assembly line task our participants were performing. So in this slide, you can see a thermal image on the left. A day with neutral temperature is depicted, while on the right, there is an image of a heat wave day. Our findings now. We do not have, unfortunately, a lot of time, so I can't delve into each parameter we assessed in detail. However, it's evident that the heat wave represented by the red bars here significantly affected all aspects of physiology and labor productivity. For today's presentation, I'll focus primarily on the labor productivity. Our findings indicate that on the first day of the heat wave, there was a 35% increase in mistakes made by participants. However, this number decreased over the second and third days of the heat wave, eventually returning to normal levels post-heat wave. Now, although occupational heat exposure affects everyone, not all workers are affected to the same extent. For example, in our recently published study, we have shown that migrant workers from low-income countries experience an 80% higher risk of experiencing core body temperature levels above the safety threshold of 38 degrees Celsius, as set by the WHO, World Health Organization. This is due to factors such as work intensity. Migrant workers tend to undertake more intense tasks, and cultural habits, including clothing choices. So here in this picture, you can see a migrant worker from an Asian country. So, of course, it's not only migration. As illustrated in this slide, there are several different factors that influence the heat strain experienced by someone. More than 18 different factors, actually, including acclimatization, aging, anthropometrics, clothing, cultural habits, medical conditions, physical fitness, among others. Also, is it only the ambient temperature that impacts workers? The answer is no. It has been repeatedly proven that other environmental factors are equally, if not more important. For example, in another study we recently published, we have shown that people working in ambient conditions characterized by the same thermal stress, but with increased solar radiation levels, were more likely to experience symptoms such as dizziness, weakness, and other signs of heat strain. This is illustrated in this slide. The orange figures you can see here represent people working under the sun, while the black figures represent people working in the shade. For example, out of every 10 people who work under the sun, approximately 6 experience symptoms of heat strain, where only 2 of every 10 experience these symptoms when working in the shade. How can we mitigate these impacts now? There are simple solutions that can drastically improve the quality of life for workers. For example, providing white clothing or coveralls to agricultural workers can help keep their skin temperature about 0.4 degrees Celsius cooler compared to wearing dark-colored clothing. And of course, there are several heat mitigation strategies that can be utilized. Several heat mitigation strategies that can be utilized to protect workers' health and productivity. Over the past 8 years, we have had the opportunity to test various heat mitigation strategies in both Europe and in the Middle East. These strategies have included mechanization, work rest cycles, hydration plans, ice slurries, different types of clothing, and ventilated vests. From these experiments, it has become evident that personalized guidance is crucial for effectively protecting every worker. The one-size-fits-all approach has been proven to be inadequate. Another important factor in protecting workers from heat exposure is the accurate assessment of workplace heat. Recent findings suggest that the WBGT, the thermal stress indicator that I mentioned before, is the most effective indicator of thermal stress in occupational settings. This instrument, as shown in this slide, considers all 4 environmental factors: temperature, humidity, wind, and sunlight. However, it's important to recognize that while WBGT is the best available indicator for these environments, it has its limitations, of course. as reflected by its score of 55. You can see the scores here, 55 out of 100 points. WBGT does not completely capture the complexity of physiological responses to heat stress. Therefore, even though WBGT is currently the best tool we have for assessing workplace thermal condition, it is still far from being perfect. This indicates that direct physiological measurements are essential to ensure that the health and well-being of workers. The main data collected to assess occupational heat strain are shown in this slide. However, the problem is that such measurements are expensive, costing between 400 and 500 euros per worker, per shift for recording and analysis. These high costs make daily physiological monitoring impractical. So for this reason, in recent years, there has been a collective effort to develop smartphone applications designed to help workers protect themselves from heat exposure. In this slide, the concept behind an application we have recently developed for this purpose is illustrated. The app connects to online weather services to retrieve the current weather data from the nearest weather station to the worker. It then uses this data to estimate the WBGT, predict physiological responses, and suggest personalized heat mitigation strategies, such as water intake and work rest cycles. In this slide, you can see the main screens of this application. We have designed it with user-friendliness in mind, ensuring that even non-experts can easily navigate and utilize it. Take-home message now. Occupational heat exposure diminishes labor capacity, increases mistakes at work, has economic implications, and affects the health of workers. However, with the adoption of heat mitigation strategies and recent technological advancements, we can mitigate, not eliminate, but mitigate the impacts of workplace heat exposure on workers' health and productivity. Thank you for your attention. It's essential to emphasize that the research and findings I've presented are the results of a collective efforts. Some of the experiments I mentioned were conducted during my PhD studies with the assistance of the entire FAME lab in Greece. Other experiments were carried out as part of my postdoctoral work with support from the entire environmental physiology lab at the Jos and Stefan Institute in Slovenia. Again, thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Leonidas. So before perhaps we will get some questions from the participants. Maybe I'll start with the first one. So your research has also fed into organizations that are part of the global decision makers. I just wanted to understand what has been the dynamic. So how has this learning informed decision making, both at the, for example, international organizations, but also corporations? Have you had any positive reactions from them, or like concrete actions being taken as a result of your research?
Yeah, fortunately, yes. So a few years back, we had the opportunity to collect data from Qatar, from the state of Qatar. That was back in 2019. And we helped the state of Qatar to develop their heat health legislation now. So yeah, a lot of data that were included in my presentation now have actually been used to help the state of Qatar to develop their own heat health legislation to protect workers in Qatar. Also, we're actually in very close collaboration with the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs in Greece, and we're actually trying to develop heat health legislation in Greece as well to protect workers. Unfortunately, there are not a lot of heat health legislations enacted now currently. In Europe, there is only one country, actually the country of Cyprus, has heat health legislation enacted. Other countries in Europe do not have similar legislations. Same for the states. There is no legislation in the states, at least federal legislation. I know that there are some regulations, but not federal legislation in the states. Canada the same. There are only few countries around the globe that currently have legislation, and we're actually very happy that our studies helped, pushing towards adopting and developing similar legislations in other countries. Yeah.
Thank you. And so these are reactions from governments, but what about, I don't know, I'm just curious about the corporations. You mentioned one example to mitigate it was using particular clothing. Is there any particular responses or programs to protect workers?
Yeah. Okay, we have tested more than 10 different heat mitigation strategies. Some of those were like clothing, of course, and some others were like mechanization, providing machineries to agricultural workers, for instance. I'll give you an example on that. So it was 2016 when we first started with our experiments, and we went to a piece of land. Approximately 10 people were working there, agricultural workers, all of them, and we actually gave them machineries to reduce the metabolic heat production, so the intensity of their work. And we went back a year later, 2017, 2018, and we found out that actually their labor productivity was increased by more than 2 times, and the physiological heat strain they experienced was actually diminished, like reduced by a significant margin. Also, clothing. Yeah, in Qatar, for instance, we have tested white clothing, and we know that some of the companies that we assisted there actually adopted these heat mitigation strategies. Same for brakes. Now the state of Qatar is actually providing brakes to their workers, much more brakes compared to what was happening, a few years before.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Leonidas. Now let's transition to our next speaker, Erin Baker. So please, Erin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think I'll try and share my screen. Okay. Sorry, let me just get this. Okay. And everybody can see my screen and hear me? Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, but the screen is not yet come up.
Okay, let me try again. Let's see. Here we go. Is that better?
Yes, we can see it. Thank you, Arian.
There we go. So my name is Erin Baker. I am a journalist with Time Magazine. And I actually have been working for the past couple of years on stories at the intersection of heat and labor. And a lot of my work has been based on the research of Professor Leonidas. I've quoted him, so it's nice to meet him in person, well, virtually in person for the first time. He showed you a similar map as this one here, but this is also looking at the number of high heat days projected by the end of the century. And again, these are days where labor is going to be particularly difficult, if not impossible. So I wanted to look at the impact of that labor on, that heat on laborers around the world. And I started my project just before the World Cup, the Qatar World Cup, which was having quite a reputational problem because it had imported so many migrant laborers around the world to start building their facilities and their infrastructure for the World Cup. And Qatar was really interesting because I came in after the consultations from Professor Leonidas in the FAME lab. So by the time I came in, Qatar had already instigated a probably the world's most ambitious heat mitigation regime for laborers. And that meant if it was too hot on certain days, there would be no outdoor work at all. Or if it was hot during the summertime, there would be no work between certain periods of time when it was the hottest. There was a requirement that all workers had access to shaded rested areas, had access to cool water. There was mandatory breaks. So this was really ambitious and progressive. And it also gave us an opportunity to sort of look at the impact before and after these rules were put in place to protect workers. And one of the things we noticed that in the year before the World Cup and after their new regulations were put in place, that you saw a 50% reduction in emergency room admittances amongst laborers in the World Cup, well, just in infrastructure and construction around the country. I looked more, in this particular story, I looked particularly at the plight of migrants, because you have two things happening with migrant laborers in Qatar and the Gulf in general, particularly from Nepal, where climate change is changing weather patterns and, in fact, forcing many people to leave their home countries because they're dependent on agriculture that is no longer reliable because of flooding or drought. And so they're being forced to leave their own countries because of climate change, and they're going to countries in the Gulf to work because that's where the jobs are. But places like the Gulf are also heating up because of climate change. So these migrants are really getting impact on both sides of their journey. So my story followed a couple of migrant laborers, particularly one who went to Qatar to work on the World Cup stadiums and other related infrastructure. And he started several years before the new rules were put into place. And over the course of his work there, he was exposed to high heat many, many times. He passed out while working. He got dizzy. Because of the conditions of his site pre the new rules, he wasn't, for example, he wasn't provided with free water. He had to buy his own water. So, of course, that limited the amount of water he would bring with him. Or he didn't want to take a break to go to the bathroom because it meant he had to go all the way down to the bottom of the construction site, which would then dock his pay because he was taking too much time away from work. And what we're seeing is this constant exposure to high heat, along with poor nutrition, not enough hydration, is causing an epidemic of chronic kidney disease, which usually doesn't manifest on the work site itself. What is happening is that the workers get too sick to work, they become weak, and they're sent home back to their home country, where they then realize that they have chronic kidney disease and have to undergo dialysis. So I did a short video documentary, and I'm just going to show you the preview of my documentary film, if it works. Give it 2 seconds, it should start. Oh. I'm conscious of time, so I don't want to make you sit through that. So, there we go. So that was the first project I did, looking particularly at migrant labor and the kind of de facto experiment we had with looking before and after the new rules were implemented in Qatar. Now, of course, one of the things we have to keep in mind is that while Qatar does have now very good rules in place, laws only go so far. You have to be able to enact them and protect them. And what we're already seeing is that in many cases, the laws are not rigorously applied as much as they should be. And that is a question of continued monitoring, especially, now that people aren't looking at Qatar, when the focus is off, those new regulations can be weakened. And then I decided, after looking at the question of migrant laborers in the Gulf, I wanted to look at what was going on in my own country of America, which is also looking at increased heat and increased heat waves, as we all saw this summer. So I focused on agricultural workers in the state of Georgia, and at a larger picture, kind of the wider US experience, and started looking at all kinds of outdoor labor, whether it's construction, agriculture, postal workers, roofers, truck drivers, UPS drivers. At the time I was reporting my story last summer in the Northern Hemisphere, we saw a union strike by UPS drivers. And one of the reasons was because it was so hot, and because of climate change, the workers were experiencing extreme temperatures in their own delivery vans, which were not air conditioned. So one of the unionization demands for the new contract was to get air conditioned trucks, which starting in January 2024, all new trucks that are being rolled out for UPS drivers will be air conditioned. So that was a success there. It was also probably one of the first union activism objectives that were based on climate change, which we haven't seen before, but I suspect we're going to start seeing that in more union contract negotiations going forward in the United States and abroad. This is one of the union UPS drivers that I met, who had also his own experience with high heat. And I also have a short little video of his experience. This is just a temperature reading from the back of Barclay's truck. That's 141 Fahrenheit. So you'll forgive me, that's got to be about 50 something in Celsius, but too hot for anyone to be working back there. Now, one of the things, as Professor Leonidas mentioned, like with his study with goats and rats, and he says they'll stop walking when their brain temperature exceeds 42 degrees Celsius. The thing that's different with workers is they can't decide to stop themselves. They do not always have the right to seek shade or to take a break or to hydrate when they need to. In the United States, we're seeing actually some pushback against workers' rights rules. Some states, such as Texas, have now said that nobody can force a company to provide workers with water breaks, even on hot days. So one of the things that I think we have to really think about when we want to talk about, when we want to protect workers' rights, is enabling them to take breaks when it's too hot, enabling them to access water when they feel too hot, and making sure that they have access to shaded rest areas. These are the things, along with the suits that Professor Leonidas talked about, I mean, yes, having a white reflective suit is going to be helpful, but the most important thing for protecting yourself from heat exposure is water, rest, and shade. And as long as employers provide that in an easily accessible way, it can go a huge way towards mitigating the adverse impact of heat on outdoor laborers. Obviously, when it gets too hot because of climate change, other mitigation factors are going to have to kick in, such as just no work during the day. We'll start having to move to working at nighttime. Already in the southern United States, in some of the agricultural areas, they do the harvesting late at night or very early in the morning, and they stop working around 10 a.m. These are all other ways that we can protect workers in the outdoor labor sites. And these are more, sorry, pictures of more laborers that I interviewed in the course of my research. Oh. I can stop sharing.
All right. Thank you so much, Erin, for your presentation and the work, the reporting that you do. So I would really love to invite our friends here from Indonesia, Brazil, and from St. Louis, if you have any questions, either for Erin or for Dr. Leonidas. So there is one question here. I'll read it out. One is, I'm Dia from Universitas Erlangga, Indonesia. I have two questions about the incredible presentation from Dr. Leonidas. One is, realizing the effect of heat waves affecting her productivity in college makes me think how until I found some place to cool my body. But is it possible that human can be resilient and adaptive? And then, or we couldn't. And then the next question is about the technological advancements to mitigate the negative impacts of climate change on workers. Perhaps you have some ideas around this, while also creating new opportunities for decent work. Maybe another question, and then the speakers can answer after the question. Sorry, is there any other question? Granty or?
Yes.
Yeah.
From Indonesia.
Yes, silakan.
My name is Christina. I'm from the University of Atmajaya, Yogyakarta, Indonesia. I would like to ask a question. We know that climate change is something that's very important and crucial, but how?
Sorry, I think I think we cannot hear you well. Maybe something with the audio, or maybe you can try to type.
There's a sound, but it's very low. Maybe you can try again, please.
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you well. How about the others?
Okay, so again, hello, my name is Christina and I am from the University of Atmajaya, Yogyakarta in Indonesia. And I would like to ask a question. I think we all know that climate change is something that is very impactful and it's very crucial for us to fix now. But how do we as university students or just normal society members, how do we make climate change, how do we bring this to the attention of governments in our country? Thank you.
Yep, maybe we can answer these two questions.
So can you hear me? Okay, sure. First question, if I remember, what was adaptation? We know from the literature that actually people can adapt. After 2 weeks in the heat, we actually we're actually very well acclimatized to hot conditions. But even if we can adapt, doesn't mean that we actually eliminate all the impacts of heat exposure on both productivity and the health of workers. So as of, I don't know if you remember my presentation, actually the mistakes made by the workers were like 35% the first day of the heat wave, but during the second day were like 20, 30, 10% after the heat wave went back to normal. But yes, we can adapt, but no, this adaptation doesn't mean that we eliminate the adverse impacts of heat on productivity and health. Second question was the heat health application. Yeah. So, okay, as I mentioned in my presentation, measuring physiological data is very expensive. So it costs 400 euros to 500 euros for a single work shift, single worker to measure and analyze. So this translates to 500, let's say, dollars, only for a single work shift, single worker. So we actually believe that with modeling approaches, we can have a very good picture of the physiological heat strain experienced by someone and try to, let's say, provide him with individualized guidance. I think this is a future, and we should actually try to move towards these, technological advances, adopting these technological advances, because it's not affordable to measuring, physiological data every single work shift for every single worker. So last question was regarding the okay. Yeah, last question is actually the most difficult one. So how can we approach, let's say, politicians and make them work towards adopting or developing heat health legislations? This is a thing that I'm not quite sure how to do that. I'm going to be honest with you. We're trying to do this, approaching politicians and telling them that heat exposure is, affects workers' health, affects productivity. But okay, simple answer is that we have to be consistent. Let's say we have to be there and speaking about it all the time. Otherwise, we have to make them understand that these will affect both the economy of the country and in the long term the health of the people of this country. That's what I believe. That's my honest opinion, please.
Thank you, Dr. Leonidas. Perhaps I would like to invite Erin, if you would like to chime in on that, how to inspire regular society members or politicians to contribute to tackling climate change.
Yeah, it's not easy, and I understand it. It can feel frustrating. You can feel like you're just one person or a young person, but there are things you can do. And just to very much begin, talk about it. Talk about it with your friends. Talk about it with your families. You're a university student. Ask the university directors, what are they doing to mitigate their own carbon emissions, their own impacts in the community, and but also, I mean, your university, obviously, because they're going to have power, but the shops, where you shop, why don't you start looking at what they do and saying, like, look, we want to see less plastic bags in the stuff we buy, or we want to see more local products that aren't imported from further away, causing greater carbon emissions. And look at what you do as well. I don't want to say that climate change is solved on a personal level, because I think that's unfair. It has to be at a leadership level, but you can lead by example. If you are much more cautious about the water you use, the emissions you make, taking public transportation when you can instead of driving a private car, all of this, and when you talk about it and you explain why, this does make an impact, and it spreads the ideas. And finally, voting, asking when it does come to election times, ask your politicians, what are they doing about climate change? What are their policies? What would they like to take to the international conferences that are going on, like right now, the COP28 conference going on in Dubai? These are, you should need to hold them accountable.
Thank you, Erin. Yes, leading by example and also holding those in the leadership accountable. Love that. Just one more question. I'll drop it in the chat. It's from the Q&A. So in developing countries like Indonesia, labor welfare has not received adequate attention. So especially for those in the informal sectors, what do you suggest so that the government pays more attention to the health of workers and laborers? Maybe any takers? Yeah.
So first of all, it's not only in the developing countries. I think the issue is everywhere. There are only a few countries, a couple of countries that have actually currently heat health legislation enacted. So again, we have to make sure this is okay. From a researcher point of view, okay, we can conduct more studies and we can publish that. But I feel that journalists can actually publish more on that, and not only more on that, but actually, yeah, it's from a researcher point of view. I think that politicians do not actually read scientific literature, but they actually care more and they read more. So they go to social media. They have social media pages and stuff. I believe that if we, from a journalist point of view, I believe that we can push more towards this direction.
Thank you. Erin, would you like to take that?
Yeah, I think also, I mean, the example of the UPS workers union in the United States is one. I know that not everywhere is unionization possible or even legal. But even where it's not, like in the Gulf, there are no unions, but there are workers' welfare associations that are doing two things. Like they're educating their workers about their rights under the law, which is a start, because some places might have worker protection rules that are just simply not applied or ignored. So educating workers about their rights, but also educating workers about what they can do to protect themselves. So unions, workers' welfare associations, for the informal sector, there's oftentimes, like somebody asked about delivery drivers, Uber, food. Once you start having an association of Uber drivers or other informal workers, it becomes a place to organize, but also to educate. And education is probably the most basic step, because some workers simply don't know that they need to take breaks to let their body recover, that they need to hydrate a certain amount if they're working in high heat situations. So we start from there. And once workers understand what they need for themselves, they can start actually advocating for the rights of workers as a group.
Thank you, Erin. Maybe I'll take just one more. Another question here is about, sorry. Worker status. I think we answered. Migrant workers. They are doing rough, heavy, dangerous non-office work, especially those working for that require short and fast completion time. But about the workers' official status, so that they could obtain reliable good health insurance. So maybe the question is around advocating for reliable health insurance for migrant workers, because they're often working in the informal sector. Yeah, any response to that?
I can speak to that. One of the things is that migrant workers come from somewhere. Indonesia, for example, has a huge migrant export industry, as is Nepal, India. And some of those rights start in the home country. Nepal, I don't know about how Indonesia protects its workers, but the Philippines protects its workers by actually having an elected official representing migrant laborers. and demanding their rights in host countries, such as Hong Kong. So there needs to be more regulation on and protection from the sending country, demanding that their workers are respected as part of the negotiations for the visa regimes that will be going in. So that's what we're starting to see a little bit with Nepal and Qatar, but there needs to be more of that because workers are a resource that some of the developing world is sending to the developed world, and the developed world needs them. They cannot do or continue to grow without it. So the sending nations are not entirely passive in this. They can actually demand better protections for their workers. So we can start there.
All right. Thank you so much. I think there are a lot of questions, but unfortunately, time is up. So again, I want to say thank you so much to Dr. Leonidas and Erin, and we hope we can have another conversation at another time. So for the students, and yeah, I think we will transition to the group discussions. We've pre-assigned you into different groups. So we have 3 guiding questions, and you can select which one you want to focus on. The first question is around how do you view the connection between climate change and workers' rights? Maybe you can map some priority issues around those connection between climate change and workers' rights. And the second one is to be more specific, which workers' rights are most affected by climate change and its consequences? Can you provide some specific examples on this? And the third one is about the actions that should be taken by industries. So because these days we're hearing how industries, businesses are adapting to climate change and they're gearing towards sustainability or sustainable business processes, how do you think they should also be ensuring the protection of workers' rights and workers' well-being? So these are the 3 main questions. Granti, if you could also help type it in the chat rooms later. So now we will assign the students to the different rooms. Yeah. So yeah, I hope it has been interesting. It was quick, but some interesting conversations in group 2. I was there. Let's hear from each group. Maybe let's start from the third group. Why not? Anyone wants to volunteer to share what has been discussed?
I was in the third group. I'm happy to discuss some of the things that we talked about. So we talked a lot about questions 2 and 3 and sort of like what we can do to, like, as governments especially, and also as industries, to protect workers, especially like vulnerable, like undocumented workers who don't have the same political rights as normal citizens. And so we talked about increasing sort of labor rights and organizing power, as well as like increasing healthcare access. So whether that's, you know, being close to healthcare, having affordable healthcare, sort of, we talk about how those issues in healthcare vary by country, but sort of universally, they're really important. And one really important point that the Indonesian students in our group brought up was that developing countries don't often have, you know, the resources or the technological development to pursue more sustainable alternatives. And so we talked a bit about how, at least in the United States, we really feel that we need to be doing more to, as a developed country, to, you know, help the sustainable transition sort of across the world. But there is a lot of like political opposition to that here, which is very frustrating.
Thanks for sharing that frustration with us, Lara. But yeah, frustration is a form of action as well. So maybe I'll invite another group. Anyone wants to volunteer? Maybe I don't have to pick who. Any hands raised? There are so many photos on my screen. I see FISIP Universitas Atmajaya Indonesia raising their hand.
Yes, again, hello. My name is Christina, and I am the representative of the University of Atmajaya, Yogyakarta in Indonesia. So, our group will be answering the third question. As industries adapt to climate change and gear towards sustainability, how should they ensure the protections of workers' rights and well-beings? So, this is our answer. Industries should give an explanation, and they need to have safety measures for climate change to the workers. This is because as climate change is getting worse every year and situations are getting more and more inhumane, it is important for the industries to take actions if they want the workers to continue working. Because no matter how hard or no matter how forced the workers are needed to work, if the conditions are too inhumane, they cannot work at all. So, there needs to be a mutual understanding from both the worker and the industry. So the industry has to first explain about climate change to workers to make sure to make sure the workers understand that they are working in amidst climate change, and they need to make sure they get the facilities that the industry should provide to them. And second, since all parts of the industry is important, both the worker and the industry also needs to be checked by a regulator, usually by the government. So the government needs to have laws and regulations and policies to make sure each industry has safety measures, and they have to explain climate change for the workers everywhere. The examples that I can give or our group can give is that, for example, in the Philippines, we have workers aging from 40 to 50 who are working every day in the fields. They are working at 4 a.m. And sometimes anywhere, and even in Indonesia, the situation it's too hot and it's too cold, or sometimes it's too hot because of the sun and drought, and sometimes it's too cold because it keeps raining and there's floods everywhere. And these are steps that the industry needs to make sure that the workers understand and they have the safety measures to adapt to climate change. For example, also Indonesia actually has a law that about safety and health regulation for workers. For example, a company in Indonesia about cigarettes, Gudang Garam, they have a program where they actually give proper clothing and proper helmets and safety measures for their workers. And I think that's an important step that everyone everywhere needs to have. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Christina, for pointing out the importance of workers' health, workers' protection, because they are the backbone of industries, right, and of our economy, aside from the fact that it's basic human rights to be protecting them. I would like to invite maybe students from Brazil. Anyone wants to share?
Então,
Yes.
eu vou chamar o Jorge. A gente fez uma discussão um pouco mais ampla, a gente acabou não se atendo tanto às questões, mas o Jorge trouxe algumas questões muito interessantes, uma visão a partir da Amazônia. Eu gostaria de convidá-lo para compartilhar conosco. Por favor, Jorge.
Bom dia, não sei se boa tarde em algum outro lugar, ou boa noite também. Sou Jorge, sou aqui de Belém do Pará, na Amazônia, Brasil. E aqui o que é interessante a gente destacar as relações de trabalho, elas foram muito enfraquecidas depois de uma medida, né, uma revogação de leis que precarizaram o mundo do trabalho. Então, quando a gente fala de trabalho no Brasil, a gente tem que levar em consideração esse mundo precário. Esse,
Oh, sorry.
Posso continuar?
I'll try to mute it. Okay, can you? Sorry, Martin, Bellamy, you were talking. There was some interruption. Yeah, can
Por favor,
you
Jorge.
repeat again?
Continua,
Tá,
por favor.
pode continuar?
Sim, por favor. Vá em frente.
Então, E aí, quando a gente fala nesse mundo do trabalho no Brasil, primeiro a gente tem que entender que o Brasil é quase um continente. Então, a gente tem vários tipos de relação de trabalho, né, que serão afetadas pela mudança do clima. E eu acho que fundamental para a gente entender é que algumas condições de trabalho, elas podem ser até atendidas. Por exemplo, no Pará, em 2025, a gente vai ter a COP, a Cúpula do Clima, que vai ser aqui. E os trabalhadores que estão, né, correndo contra o tempo para construir os espaços que vão ser utilizados para a COP, com certeza vai ter alguma greve no futuro, porque aqui, né, esse calor extremo proporcionado pelo El Niño, pelas mudanças, pelo desmate na Amazônia, pelas queimadas, está fazendo com que o calor fique absurdo. E as condições de trabalho deles, com certeza, devem estar precárias. E, para além disso, a gente tem, para indo finalizar, a gente tem uma questão fundamental que as grandes obras aqui, elas não estruturaram o mundo do trabalho, nem as pessoas que moram aqui. Elas aconteceram, Copa do Mundo, Olimpíadas, todos os grandes eventos que tiveram no passado aqui, e elas deixaram uma marca, que foi uma marca de precarização ainda maior do trabalho. Tem uma usina hidrelétrica que foi construída aqui na Amazônia, que ela se chama Belo Monte, e os trabalhadores que foram para lá, eles trabalharam durante a sua construção, que demorou mais ou menos uns 4 anos, se eu não me engano, e agora eles estão entregues a condições precárias, né, sociais, entregues à dependência química, cometendo pequenos furtos, né, o número da população carcerária lá em Altamira lá explodiu depois da construção de Altamira. Então a gente vai ver isso, esse processo também acontecendo aqui em Belém do Pará. Em
Eu acho. I think George lost his connection.
Yeah, I think it's freezing. I think what was Martin's highlighted was around the importance of unionizing, collective action by the workers. He also underlined, that there are development works such as I believe it was the hydro, electricity that was being constructed, but it did not benefit the people or the workers there. So yeah, I think in my group we were also discussing that these these workers union are important, but sometimes the aspect of climate change or the extreme heat or the consequences of climate change is not yet part of the advocacy of the workers union. So maybe it's also an educational aspect that we could keep on talking about. I want to invite another group who I think anyone wants to share. Well, again, so many images on my screen. I think my group, anyone from my group 2, I think it was breakout room 2. Dia, yes, I see your hand.
Okay, thank you. First of all, am I audible for presenting this? Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. Hello, I'm the representative from Universitas Airlangga and the chamber with Miss Intan. And for all of your representation about this issue, especially in our chamber, we have a distinguished situation in Indonesia and in the Washington DC, whereas in the Washington DC, this is not a more like a big deal or the concern as not important like in Indonesia. In Indonesia itself, we also realize that Indonesia is too hot because we also in the equator season, like in the equator position, to have some two weather here, like in the rainy season or not. And we noticed that from the from the presentation here, we've learned that we have not paid attention to occupational health, which is closely related to climate change. And in the future, where is also mentioning about the science aspect, or we also know the rights of the workers itself. We also know that government position here to make some regulation is also important to note. And this government relation to make some regulation are needed to protect workers from extreme weather conditions. And also, this is relating to our conversation here about the science aspect, or the workers' right aspect in the climate change, especially in the heat waves or something else. Maybe this is our note from our chamber, and thank you.
Thanks so much, Dia. Are there any other groups that has not shared their views? I think while waiting, if there's any, Grantee, can we prepare, we would like to invite the students to share one word that reflect your learnings today, or maybe interesting facts that you learned today, just to get a sense of what was interesting for this group. Is the slide ready? The Slido link? Yes, here it is. So would you mind sharing just one word to represent what you have learned from today's conversation? Interesting. It's coming up. United, underprivileged topic, exciting, impressive. I assume uniao means united. Am I right, Maria? Advocacy, educate, change, understanding, safety, rights, equality. Yep, keep it coming. Humans. Yeah, very interesting statement as well. That came, I think it came from Melissa, I believe. She mentioned that we are a lot more aware of the scientific aspects of climate change, but how it is affecting us at the individual level, especially about workers' rights. It's quite a new conversation that is not being talked about enough yet. So I hope we can be the ones who continue talking about this topic, continue driving for change out there, whether it means perhaps companies factoring in climate change consequences in their insurance program, for example, or like what was mentioned, governments working on heat legislation. Maybe it could mean insurance for fishermen who are affected by maybe rising sea level, or maybe farmers who are experiencing drought, etc. Insightful consistency is also important, because advocacy doesn't happen overnight, of course. It's also, yeah, it needs consistency. It is in the everyday. So yep, I want to invite if my colleagues from the Pulitzer Center has additional things to share, Grantee, Maria, or Anne, before we wrap up.
Sorry, Medan.
Yes.
Actually, I think we do have a session for the lecturers here to share their reflection and their thoughts. Please go ahead. Maybe Bu Arum, Bu Jenny, or maybe professors from the US or Brazil. think we have a hand from Ibu Jani.
Can I? From Atmajaya.
Sure, Ibu.
Yes. My name is Gregoria Arum from Universitas Atmajaya, Yogyakarta. So for us, it's a really great opportunity for students, even for me as a lecturer, to get to know more about climate change and labor issues, because we usually only think about climate change only. But now we also learn how actually climate change also impact to the labor issues. And here we can learn from the expert as well as from the journalists who really hands-on directly, bring any report or news directly from the field. As well as today we learn from other students, other speakers today. So I think that's very insightful for students, and I hope this is not the first time Pulitzer Center try to link students, not from one country to another country, but I think this is a good start for all students, for the young generation to be being introduced to climate change or any environmental issues, but then maybe we can level up to many different discussions further. So thank you, Pulitzer Center. Thank you for the space as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Arum and Universitas Atmajaya, Yogyakarta. So happy to have you here. Any other lecturers would like to share?
Eugenie, please go ahead. I think I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you very much, Bu Granti and Bu Intan. Good night, good evening from Indonesia. My name is Yani. I'm from Universitas Airlangga in Surabaya, Indonesia. I think I found this forum is very impressive because Pulitzer opened up opportunity for the student across the world. I think also across culture. So it is impressive because our student can hear another perspective from another country, and from this very short meeting, I think Bu Intan, maybe next time we can have more time to discuss, because this is a very big issue. But I think as a start, it is a really a good idea, and I think climate change is something need to be discussed around the globe. It is not only about what happened in Indonesia. Even if I'm talking with my student, I really want to increase the awareness in Indonesian setting area, because also as we discussed in our chamber, Indonesia, because we are a tropical country, so we are get used to with the hot weather. So I think when it is climate change, there is the increase in heating, we not really feel it as something striking. But I think we cannot just move when it is more severe. I think we have to start it now to give a reaction in a proper way about the climate change, and also increasing awareness. And I think this forum is a really a good start from the student, because here is student and the a lecturer also have in the same forum. So I think it is open up the platform for us to discuss more in a casual way, and also for as a lecturer, I also have a chance to to introduce the climate change in the perspective, because I'm teaching international business transaction. So I think in the class, when I'm talking about some aspect on environmental law and some aspect of how WTO deal with climate change, it is easier for me to include the climate change and also the relation with the worker rights in the topic. So I think once again the same thing with what Ibu dosen from Universitas Atmajaya. I hope it is not the first and the last. I think it is just the beginning for us to keep going on, open up the opportunity for the student to talk each other. Thank you, Bu Intan. Thank you, Bu Granti, and thank you, Pulitzer.
Thank you so much, Ibu Yani. I believe Danilo has his hand raised from Emancipa.
Olá, bom dia. Me escutam? Me ouvem bem? Sim. Primeiro, agradecer o convite, a organização por parte do Pulitzer. Eu acho que encontros como esse eles têm uma potência grande, porque ao discutir mudanças climáticas e mundo do trabalho, eu acho que tem uma determinante importante que hoje, atualmente, é negligenciada, que é o debate sobre os mundos do trabalho, quais as condições de trabalho e para onde o mundo do trabalho, as condições dos trabalhadores estão caminhando junto aos impactos das mudanças climáticas. O mundo do trabalho em si precarizando, como nós estamos vendo, o trabalho de imigrante. O exemplo do Catar, eu acho que foi muito bom, mas o exemplo do Catar, que envolveu um grande evento, né, e um trabalho precário de incidência e com uma incidência direta do clima, nós podemos colocar nos nossos cotidianos, o trabalho dos imigrantes nos países centrais, ou os trabalhos precarizados através de plataformas, Uber enfim, são trabalhos que vêm perdendo direitos historicamente constituídos. Então, nos desafia a entender como nós considerarmos as mudanças climáticas tendo impacto no mundo do trabalho, em um mundo do trabalho onde os direitos muitas vezes vêm sendo perdidos. E então, nos desafia a pensar soluções que reflitam sobre esse mundo do trabalho em que nós convivemos com a precarização, trabalhos análogos à escravidão, trabalhos que têm uma total falta de cobertura de direitos, dando um exemplo aqui de impacto direto do Brasil, que o Jorge completaria a fala dele, que ele trouxe no nosso grupo e perdeu a conexão, por exemplo, dos trabalhadores ribeirinhos que vivem da pesca na Amazônia, em que não há uma legislação que preveja a intensificação das secas e a não possibilidade de trabalho. A impossibilidade de trabalho a partir dessas novas condições que as mudanças climáticas vêm impondo. Então, o regime de trabalho ele não vem acompanhando. Então, eu acho que é muito importante, e encontros internacionais, eu acho que eles nos levam como esse propósito, por isso eu acho que o espaço tem potência de troca e de discussão, da gente conseguir entender essa dimensão de as mudanças climáticas, elas estão, a gente tem políticas de impacto e muitas vezes as próprias, enfim, essa política ela é gerada a partir, por exemplo, outro exemplo aqui do Brasil, a construção de hidrelétricas é tido como uma forma de construção limpa, renovável, que mitiga danos em relação às condições climáticas, mas que são condições terríveis aos trabalhadores, às comunidades tradicionais que são impactadas por essas hidrelétricas, aos trabalhadores que nelas trabalham. Então, o debate geral, eu acho que ele tem que caminhar para entender os impactos da mudança climática, mas centralmente para onde está indo o nosso mundo do trabalho e como o próprio processo de organização desse novo mundo do trabalho pode impactar, não só como uma responsabilidade individual do trabalhador, usar EPI, beber mais água, ter mais tempo de pausa. Então, acho que a gente precisa lutar por tudo isso, mas a gente não pode responsabilizar o trabalhador, porque muitas vezes no mundo do trabalho atual não há espaço para essas mudanças. Na verdade, o que a gente está observando é uma perda de direitos. Então, como a gente incorpora esse novo mundo do trabalho no debate em relação às mudanças climáticas a partir da sua própria condição, que é extremamente impactada e extremamente impactada por essas próprias mudanças. Então, acho que tem que ter um processo de envolvimento dessas duas coisas, de intersecção entre esses dois debates. Obrigado pelo espaço.
Thank you so much, Danilo. It really wraps the conversation. As you mentioned, the conditions of these labor, they're already, faced with challenges. They're already the precariat society. And then coupled with consequences of climate change, it's making their daily challenges even more difficult, right? And I love what you pointed out. It was also discussed in the previous discussions that this is actually a systemic or a structural problem. It's not because an individual worker doesn't know how to protect her or himself, but it's the conditions that are, they are being conditioned to be vulnerable, and sometimes they get the blame when they're already facing precarity, and then consequences of nature, and then these challenges are not being recognized by those who are in power, those who hold the decisions. So I really do believe that when students are talking about this, again, conversation is part of the change. It's not just a means to achieve change, because some of us start at the oblivious level, and by having more conversations around this, suggesting this type of topic in your university with your friends, that maybe the next day when we're joining some climate action, some climate protest, we also think about the workers out there, and the rights that are being taken away from them when they're not getting the protection that they deserve. And on the other hand, looking at the macroeconomy level, if we don't protect the workers enough, I think as our friend from Yogyakarta mentioned, it is also it's also a consequence for the broader economy. So I think these climate change consequences should be taken into account, not just as some ad hoc instances, but factored in when we are talking about protection for workers, insurance for workers, maybe legislation as well. So yeah, I think really happy that we are continuing this conversation, and thank you so much for being here today. And I am just dropping on the chat if it would be really lovely if you want to read more. We have a lot of resources at the Pulitzer Center website. And we do have a tradition of taking a group photo, because there are so many of us here tonight. So if you don't mind to open your camera and let's take a photo.
3, 2, 1. Great.
All right.
Great pictures there.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. Lovely to have you here. Take care of your health. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.